Normally it took something serious for him to get emotional, but this definitely was something severe. He slowly made his way to a chair along the wall in the foyer. Still holding the photo, he took a seat in the chair. He knew he was alone, so he took the time he needed to grieve. Several minutes or more of sitting in the chair passed. His eyes were still watery, but the tears on his cheeks were slowly drying, leaving a light trail of fine salt. He now felt relieved enough to continue. He slowly stood up, walked back to the table, and places the photo of Sarah on top. At that point he remembered that he needed to contact Sarah's parents. He took a deep breath, then head back to the kitchen, where the phone was. They lived in Arizona. It was late enough in the morning that he likely would not get them out of bed. After Peter made the difficult call to Sarah's parents, he decided to search outside in the yard again. He did not want to go too far with Carl stopping by to pick up the photo, so he headed down the hallway to the kitchen to go out the back door. At the back door, he opened the door and went down the back steps. Pausing at the bottom of the steps, he decided to walk around to the house to his left. Not having been on this side of the house much, he was curious what he would find. He had not even mowed the lawn in the house yet. There was a large evergreen bush next to the house at the corner of the house. Looking at the side of the house, nothing really appeared strange to him. He scanned the windows and the eaves, but noted nothing strange. He kept making his way around the outside wall of the house. His right foot struck something solid. After almost tripping on the obstruction, Peter took a step back and looked down to see what his foot had hit. It was a rectangular slab of concrete extending about 5 feet from the concrete house foundation. Not seeing any sign of a doorway or anything else that would require a concrete slab, he was puzzled as to why the slab existed. It looked well worn with some of the edges crumbling slightly and the larger stones were exposed. Also, the surface of the slab was uneven and unprofessional with visible trowel marks. He knelt down and rubbed his right hand over the slab. Not sure why he felt compelled to do this, he paused and pulled his hand slowly away from the slab. It occurred to him that the slab almost looked as if it was intended to cover something up. He remained in the crouched position for a few seconds, and then got up to continue to search around the house. As he walked toward the front of the house, he did catch himself glancing back to the slab once more. He shook his head and made it to the front of the house. He noticed Vernon in the front yard next door. Vernon put down the clippers he had in his hand, and walked over to Peter. "Hello Peter, sorry to hear that your wife is missing," Vernon said, stopping a few steps in front of Peter. "Thanks Vernon. How did you hear about it?" Peter asked. Vernon looked down, then out toward the street for a moment, and replied, "I saw the article in the paper this morning and, well, I did talk to the police yesterday too." "Were they asking you questions?" Peter asked, a bit puzzled. "Some. Not sure why though. I don't figure I'm much help at my age," Vernon replied. "So you didn't see anything strange Friday night or Saturday morning around here, I take it?" Peter asked. "No, I was in bed that night, and I didn't even hear you two coming home," Vernon replied. "Well, thanks for your thoughts, Vernon," Peter replied. Vernon sighed and looked back into the street. Peter could tell he had something else to say. Looking back toward Peter, Vernon commented, "I wish you two had listened to my warning about that house." Peter was again stunned. He watched Vernon slowly shuffle his feet around toward his yard. As Vernon walked away, Peter did manage to say, "Right now, I wish that we did too." Vernon paused for a moment, and turned his head slightly over his left shoulder. But then faced forward again and continued on to his yard work. Peter took a deep breath, and walked around to the front of his house to look for more possible clues. Later in the backyard, after looking through the garage, Vernon's comments weighed heavily on his mind. Maybe there could have been something going on with the history of house. Since he was finding nothing on the outside of the house, he decided he would go back inside and search the office to see if he could find any clues. Sarah had been looking through the office. He wanted to find what it was that she wanted to tell him about from the office, before she disappeared. He grasped the railing on the steps to the back door and stepped toward the door. At the top of the steps, he passed through the screen door open, then the back door. In the hallway, he closed the door behind him. He then headed to the office. The door to the office was partially open, so he pushed it the rest of the way until it contacted some boxes full of papers on the floor. He took a seat in the desk chair and paused for a moment to think. Rotating the chair right then left, he decided to start with the drawer that Sarah said that slammed shut. He reached down and pulled the wooden handle. The drawer slid open. The drawer was stuffed with very old folders and cut-out newspaper articles. Peter slowly moved his hand toward the drawer. The scent of the old papers permeated the room. Feeling the top of the items in the drawer, he stopped on a folder resting on the top. This may have been one that Sarah had been looking at a few days earlier. He picked up the old folder and set it on the desk. He opened the folder. It was full of yellow and brown newspaper articles. As he read the article on the top, he saw that it was an article about a missing person. The name of Oliver Croft was circled. It was familiar to him. He then remembered that the previous owner's last name was Croft. Scanning the article, he could see the name of Mildred Croft as the spouse of the missing person. He had heard that Mildred's husband was missing too, but this article could reveal more details. The paper's date was printed on the corner of the page. It read January 17, 1988. He now remembered that Carl had mentioned he disappeared somewhere in the 80s. Continuing to scan the article with interest, Peter read more details. The article just explained the circumstances for Oliver's disappearance. He noted that Oliver was last seen by Mildred in the house one evening a few days before the article was written. After he completed reading the article, he set it to the other side of the open folder. The next article appeared to be about Oliver's disappearance. From the date, it was printed a few days later. The article mentioned a few leads, but nothing seemed to really help him out much so far. When he was about halfway through the article, the phone rang in the kitchen. Peter got up and exited the office to answer the phone. He walked over to the counter and removed the cordless phone from the charger. "Hello?" Peter asked, as he answered. "Hello, this is Sheriff Gordon Hughes." "Is this Peter?" Gordon asked. Yeah, this is Peter." "Do you have any news on Sarah, Gordon?" Peter asked. "Well, that's why I'm calling, Peter. We may have a lead that we are following. I can't sugarcoat this, but we plan on having the river searched," Gordon said carefully. Peter gasped and closed his eyes for a moment. With his eyes still closed, he asked, "The river, why would you need to search the river?" "We had someone call in a tip. This person said that they noticed the two of you this past Friday on the 3rd Avenue bridge over the river," Gordon responded. "Yes, we did talk on the bridge, but I don't know why that would lead to having to search the river," Peter replied, with his eyes open again. "Well, normally it wouldn't, but the person mentioned that Sarah seemed to be staring at the river intently for quite a while," Gordon explains. Peter's mind flashed back to Friday on the bridge. He did remember now that she was gazing into the river when they talked. "Damn, Gordon, I remember that, but I didn't think that much about it until now. You think she may have jumped into the river or something?" Peter asked. "We don't know, Peter. That's why we are conducting the search. The diver team should be there about now, and I'll be heading over when I finish this call," Gordon replied. "Can I watch the search?" Peter asked. "Yes, but I would recommend coming only if you feel you are ready for it, Gordon answered. Peter sighed. After nodding his head a few times, he said, I need to be there for her, Gordon. Okay, that's fine, Peter. Just remember you can leave at any time, Gordon replied. Thanks, Gordon, I'll see you there, Peter said. Okay, Peter, drive safe. Goodbye, Gordon said. Goodbye, Gordon, Peter said just before he hung up the phone. He put his thumb and forefinger to his closed eyes for a moment. He sighed once again. His keys were in the bedroom. He opened his eyes and made his way from the kitchen to the hallway to retrieve his keys. When he reached the foyer, he paused a moment when he remembered that Sarah's car was still in the garage. The bridge was not that far away. So he decided to walk rather than drive. He still was in need of the keys for the house, so he did continue upstairs to get the keys. About 3 steps up, he turned around and stared at the closed front door. He remembered that it had been open that Saturday morning when he awoke on the floor. Could she have gone out the front door? Maybe he had been following her but passed out in the foyer. Not knowing the answers, he sighed then continued up the steps to retrieve his keys. As he walked up the steps he remembered that Carl may be stopping by to pick up the photo of Sarah. He decided he would just leave the photo on the porch near the front door with a short note. The skies filtering through the tree-lined streets above him were overcast as he walked on the sidewalk the few blocks to the 3rd Avenue bridge. A slight breeze almost made the late summer day seem more like a fall day. As he reached the corner to 3rd Avenue, he gazed down the street toward the bridge. His heart sank as he saw several police and sheriff vehicles with lights flashing. One of the vehicles parked near the bridge was towing an empty boat trailer. He could see a few people standing on the bridge, but most of the activity was below his line of sight at the river level. After taking a deep breath, he crossed the street to the sidewalk on the other side of the road. He continued toward the bridge. Apprehension caused him to walk slowly. He was not sure he was ready to face what could be ahead. As he got closer to the bridge, he could hear some muffled voices, but was unable to make out any full sentences. He walked past a few parked and empty police and sheriff cars. Reaching the bridge railing, he peered over the edge toward the river below. He could see a small boat in the river with a deputy in it. In the river, he could see 2 men in wetsuits and scuba gear. One was under the water. The other was talking to the deputy in the boat, while holding onto the side of the boat. There were several other officers and deputies on the shore. He did recognize some of the police officers, like Mark, Keith, and Scott. A hand touched his back, surprising him. You made it, Peter, a calm voice said from behind him. Peter turned around quickly and realized it was Gordon. Oh, hi Gordon, you just surprised me there a bit. My apologies, Peter. How are you holding up? Gordon asked. Nervous, Gordon, I'm nervous. I guess I'm not sure I'm ready for this, but I suppose I do need to find out what happened to Sarah, Peter replied. Well, to give you an update, they have been searching for around 20 minutes now and they have not found anything yet. It's possible this may be a wild goose chase, but we needed to follow up on the lead, Gordon said. Yeah, I understand that, Peter agreed. I just don't know what could have happened to her. I can't imagine her committing suicide, but I suppose I could have missed the signs. Peter, even the pros can miss the signs some of the time. Everybody is different. If that is what happened, you can't blame yourself, Gordon commented as he joined Peter at the railing. Oh God, I don't know how I could avoid not blaming myself, he said, shaking his head slightly. You have to try, Peter. You have to try, Gordon said. A diver underwater about 40 feet down the river popped his head up out of the water and waved his right arm from side to side. The deputy in the boat started the motor and slowly maneuvered toward the signaling diver. The other diver swam toward the same spot. Peter's heart sunk, realizing they may have found something. His breathing quickened too. Gordon yelled from the bridge, "You find something, Wad? Something's down here." "It's too murky to make much out yet though," Wad yelled back to Gordon. Peter sighed, and under his breath said, "Oh geez. This is not good." The other diver reached Rod and the boat pulled alongside them too. Gordon moved away from Peter's side and walked along the sidewalk of the bridge. He then walked down to the edge of the river to watch his deputies. Peter remained in the same spot to watch from the bridge. The two divers pushed off from the boat and dropped underwater. Swirls in the water above and occasional bubbles indicated the spot where the divers were busy below the surface. A fin popped out of the water and slapped against the surface, then disappeared again. About a minute passed with only the sound of a few muffled voices and the water slowly flowing underneath the bridge. First, one diver came back to the surface, then the second. They appeared to stand on the bottom of the shallow river, which allowed the water level to reach their shoulders. Facing each other, they struggled to lift something out of the water. The dark waterlogged object reached the surface. The two deputies then lifted the sagging object out of the water and into the boat. Water dripped off of the object. Peter stared at it intently. His first impression was that it really did not resemble anything like a body, but he realized that he could be wrong. To him it almost appeared to be a garbage bag. He took a deep breath and continued to watch closely. The deputy in the boat examined the object. He then tore at the thin surface of the object. A multitude of colored objects were inside. The deputy in the boat shook his head and faced Gordon on the riverbank. "It's just a bag of garbage, Gordon," the deputy yelled to Gordon. "Thanks," Gordon shouted back. Peter's legs felt weak after hearing the news. He gripped the railing tight as he tried to keep his legs from collapsing under him. He closed his eyes, inhaled deep, and held it for a few seconds, then exhaled. What a relief, he thought to himself, but then again Sarah was still missing. He wanted this ordeal to be over. Whatever happened, the sooner he discovered the answer, the sooner he would be able to start to move on. He opened his eyes again. To his left he could see that Gordon was making his way back to him again. Gordon comes up alongside Peter again and places his left hand on the bridge railing. "Well, that was nothing," Gordon said. "Yeah, I don't think I want Sarah found here anyway," Peter said, looking back down the river at the boat and divers. "Well, it may turn out that way. We'll keep looking for her, Peter," Gordon said. "I know that you and your team are doing the best they can," Peter commented. "Thanks, Peter. We all want to find Sarah," Gordon replied. They stood together on the bridge watching the divers continue the search around the bridge. Other than a few more pieces of trash and a few other objects, the team found nothing. After about an hour more, the search was halted. The police returned back to duty, and the sheriff deputies pack up their gear. Peter was relieved that nothing was found in the river. He felt that he was ready to return home. "Well, Gordon, I think I'm going to head back home. Just give me a call if you find anything else," Peter said to Gordon. "Thank you for coming by, Peter. Again, I hope that we will find her soon, and I'll contact you as soon as we discover any new clues." "Take care," Gordon replied. "Thanks, Gordon, I will," Peter said as he took his hands off of the railing and began walking along the sidewalk off of the bridge. He then made his way back to their house. He found himself noticing his surroundings as he walked along the streets. Maybe he was trying to take his mind off of missing Sarah. Where was she? He knew that he could not answer that question at the moment. He wanted to know the answer, but then again, maybe he really did not want to know. The cool air did manage to refresh him on his walk back to the house. As he approached the house, he heard the voices of young girls playing. Soon after hearing the voices, he saw 3 girls playing in front of the house next door. He recognized one as a girl who lived next door. And the others must be her friends. They were jumping rope. 2 of them were swinging the rope around and the other jumped in between in a rhythmic pattern to keep from becoming entangled in the rope. As they performed this, they sang together in a rhythm with the jumping. Peter smiled to himself, since they do not notice him. The sight was something he really had not seen since he was a kid himself. He continued walking up the front walk to the front of the house. As he made his way up the stairs to the porch, he could see that the photo he had left for Carl was propped against the door along with the note. Seeing her photo again caused him to pause mid-stride. He closed his eyes and tried to take a deep breath. His stomach began to churn and feel tight. The sight of Sarah's image had triggered a reaction he was not prepared for. He opened his eyes and continued toward the door. Stopping in front of the door, he fumbled for the keys in his pocket. Feeling even more nauseous, he managed to unlock the door. He pushed the door open. The photo and note fall from the leaning position to the floor. Peter reached down to pick them up. It was more difficult than he anticipated with his uneasy stomach. He did pick the photo and the note up, but his head felt light as he rights himself again. He managed to place the photo and the note on a table. Pausing for a moment, he turned and pushed the door shut. His forehead began to throb from his pounding heart. A lump formed in his throat, and he realized he was going to be sick. Thinking quickly, he headed down the hallway toward the kitchen. He rounded the corner and headed directly to the sink. Making it just in time, the vomit was expelled into the sink. With his eyes closed, he holds his head over the sink as a strand of saliva hung from his mouth into the sink. It quickly narrowed enough to break. Peter turned on the cold water and cupped his hands together under the water stream to collect it. He then rubbed the water over his face and kept his hands over his eyes for a moment. The deep breath along with the splash of water and even getting sick actually seemed to help him feel better. He opened his eyes and removed his hands from his face. He reached over to turn off the water. With a few drops of water remaining on his face, he decided he would return to the office to search for more information on the history of the house. As he passed the basement door, something compelled him to gaze at it. Puzzled as to why he was staring at the door, he continued toward the office. The office door was partially open. He pushed the door open the rest of the way. It creaked as it swung into the room. As he entered the room, he tried to remember where he left off in his search. He then saw the open folder on the desk with the article he had partially finished on top. After he took a seat in the chair, he picked up the article again and started to read it. He scanned the article until he locates the last part he remembered. He slowed to read the rest of the article about Mildred's missing husband, Oliver. The article contained more of the details. Near the end of the article, one line jumped out at him. It read that a couple disappeared in 1967 from the same house. Peter's jaw dropped. So this house really did have a bad history with disappearances. His hands began to tremble as he tried to continue. Slowly, he was able to read the few remaining lines in the article. He learned that the couple's names were Russell and Clara Hanford. The names began to run through his mind. As he thought about the new knowledge, he tried to think what to do with the information. Would it help find Sarah? All he can do was hope that it would. Should he tell the police? Probably so, but hopefully they would already have known about Russell and Clara, though they had not mentioned it. Then he remembered that Vernon had warned him this place was cursed. Maybe this was what he meant with his warning, and maybe he could tell him more. Talking to Vernon sounded like a good idea to him. It was possible that he could be outside. He stood up from the chair and faced the open office door. As he made his way to the doorway, the doorbell rang. He paused for a moment, then continues walking through the door. He passed the back hallway and went through the kitchen. From there, he walked down to the foyer. He could see a shadow in through the sheer curtain covering the front door window. When he reached the door, he pulled the door open. Carl was standing on the porch with a friendly smile. Peter noticed that he had a plastic food container in his hand. "Hello, Carl. Thanks so much for stopping by," Peter said. "How are you doing, Peter?" "I'm just stopping by to pick up the photo so I can make up the flyers," Carl replied. "I know that'll help immensely. The more people we can make aware that Sarah is missing, the better the chances are that she'll be found," Peter commented. "I agree. It's the least I can do to help," Carl said. "Won't you come in for a moment?" Peter asked. "Sure," Carl said as Peter stepped back slightly and Carl began stepping into the foyer. "Oh, this is for you. Mary thought that you could use some food for dinner," Carl offers as he presents the food container to Peter. Peter took hold of the still warm container and replied, "Wow, that is great. Since Sarah has been missing, I really haven't been focusing on eating right, I suppose." "That's what Mary was figuring, Peter. We both know that you have plenty of other things on your mind now," Carl agreed. "That's for sure." "Oh, let me give you the photo," Peter said as he set the container on a side table and picked up the photo of Sarah from the same table. He left the note on the table. "Here's the photo, Carl." "I haven't taken it out of the frame yet," Peter said, moving the photo close to Carl. As Carl took the photo, he said, "Oh, I can handle getting the photo out of the frame, Peter. I'll make sure you get the photo and the frame back too." As Carl cradled the photo in his hands, he looked at the image of Sarah. He sighed and then said, "Peter, I really hope we can find Sarah soon." "Thanks, Carl, I sure hope we find her soon too. This has been rough so far. I had to make the call to Sarah's parents earlier today," Peter said. "Wow, I don't envy you on that one." "Again, I hope this will help," Carl replied, looking at the photo. Sensing Carl was close to leaving, Peter asked, "Before you leave, Carl, I just was reading an old article that I found in the office in the back room that said that a couple disappeared from this house in, let's see, 1967, I believe. Do you remember anything about the case?" Carl pulled the photo to his chest and looked to his left to think. After a few seconds he asked, "Do you remember the couple's name?" It was Hanford, Russell and Clara Hanford, if I remember correctly." "I can get the article if you would like to see it," Peter replied. Carl shook his head and said, "The names do not sound familiar. I'm sure it happened, but it was a long time ago, and at that time I likely was in college. Sorry, I can't give you more information on that. I can ask a few people though." "You said the name was Hanford, correct?" "Yes, Russell and Clara Hanford. I plan on asking my next-door neighbor about the disappearance, too. I think he has been around here for a long time." "He also warned us against buying the house too," Peter commented. "He actually warned you about the house?" Carl responded, surprised. "Well, he said the house was cursed or something. Now I'm wondering if maybe he could be right. You know, with Sarah disappearing, and several previous owners. It makes me wonder," Peter added. "Well, asking your neighbor may give you some new information at least. Living next door, he likely would be a good person to ask," Carl replied. "That's what I figure too. Well, I'd better let you take the photo so you can make up the flyers. Thanks again so much for helping with them. I will enjoy the dinner too. Please give Mary my sincere thanks as well," Peter said. "I will tell her, Peter. You take care, and give me a call if you can think of anything else I can help with," Carl said as he extended his right hand toward Peter. Peter shook Carl's hand and said, "Thanks, Carl, I'll keep in touch."